Refinement of Antichrist. Trilogy by Natalia Foley.
Chapter 18. Senator Ronald Bachmann stood by the wide, tall window of his office, gazing into the empty space beyond his home. His stare was unfocused, his face unusually pale. The entire demeanor of the man was so altered that someone who had known him for a long time might not have recognized him. The senator looked lost, perhaps for the first time in his life. Except once before, when he truly was lost, when he was 7 years old and his mother died, leaving him alone on the streets of a hostile city. Then he had felt utterly lost, but since then, almost never. No, the exact number of times he had felt lost since then was 0. Never. The senator stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, head held high, spine rigid and straight. He believed he had led an extraordinary life, its true depth unknown to anyone, its real purpose known only to him, or so he had believed. That belief, however, had now been shaken, nearly destroyed. He was by far one of the most powerful men in the world, if not the most powerful. He knew this. His financial resources were limitless in the absolute sense of the word. His influence on global affairs was enormous. There was not a single small country on earth untouched by his sphere of interest, and therefore under his influence. Loyal men who believed they served some kind of powerful underground organization ruling the world, served in nearly every government on the planet. He could appoint most public officials wherever he wished on Earth. There were very few limitations on what he could do. In fact, he once believed there were none at all. And suddenly he discovered that, for all his power, wealth, and influence, he could not solve a very simple problem. He could not figure out what had happened to his grandson. David had indeed vanished. It was not a simple crime, as Ronald Bachmann believed it to be, but a highly planned and extremely professionally executed one. And it was clear to the senator that the main target was not David, but himself. Someone close to him, someone close enough to know that David was the greatest hope of his life, the chosen successor to his wealth, power, and influence. Taking away his grandson was the deepest stab in the back imaginable. Yet even the person who orchestrated this attack still failed to grasp the true extent of his power, which, in fact, no longer seemed to matter. With all his power, he now felt utterly powerless, lost, just as he had been lost in November 1935 in the middle of New York, when his beautiful young mother died from a simple pneumonia that today could be cured in a week. But back then, she had no money to buy medicine. She had raised him alone, because a few years earlier, when he was just 6, his father had died. The cause of his death was far more cruel. He was merely one of the victims in the mob war between Italian and Irish gangs fighting for control over the city. The senator did not remember much about his father. His memories of him consisted of a few scattered scenes, brief episodes stored in his mind like postcards, immovable, black and white, or more accurately, brown, perhaps because that was the color of the only photograph left of his father, a photo his mother had kept as the most precious of her few possessions and which she passed on to her son as her only inheritance. She had left him a photo of his father, and she would say, "Look how handsome he was. You are just like him." A marriage certificate confirming her union with his father. "Look how honorable he was. He married me despite his family's disapproval. He was a real man. You can be proud of him." And a birth certificate confirming his own birth in the city of New York on October 17th, 1925, Joseph Romano. "Look," she would say, "you were born on American soil. This country belongs to you. All opportunities here belong to you. This is all I can give you. You are an American citizen. This is your motherland. Love it." She also left him a postcard depicting the massive screw steamship George Washington, the ship that had brought her from Bremen to New York in 1922, the city where she married Joseph's father, gave birth to Joseph, became a widow, and died far too young at the age of 28, without ever experiencing all that life had to offer, leaving her only child a 10-year-old orphan in the cruel city of New York in 1935. The final thing she left him was a large old locker with a strange Latin engraving, Vincit qui se vincit. He conquers who conquers himself. The senator loved that phrase. It had been his life's motto. Yet he had never opened the locker. His mother had forbidden it. "Keep it," she said. "Never lose it. Pass it down through the generations. Only the most deserving shall have it. It must remain in the family as long as the family exists. It is sacred. It holds immense power. It will bring the whole world at your feet. It will bring you luck, power, and success. The one who possesses it rules the world. Joseph had always wanted to ask her why, then. It had not brought her all of the above, but he never could. She was already dead. She gave him the locker 15 minutes before she died, and her words were her last, except that she added at the end, "Remember, I was the happiest woman in the whole world. I was married to the man I loved, and I gave birth to a beautiful child, you. I had a very happy life, and I am dying in peace because I know you will see your great and incredible future. Don't you doubt that for a single moment." Then she kissed his forehead, whispered, "I love you, Joe," closed her eyes, so he wouldn't have to do it for her, and smiled as she died in peace, leaving in his small palm that ancient, mysterious locker, which he kept as his most precious possession. She kept her promise. His life had been a spectacular adventure, but he never stopped missing her. Never. And now, when he felt as lost as the day she died, he missed her more than ever. He squeezed the locker in his palm, feeling as though his mother's blessing had returned to him, transcending time and space. "I have no one to leave it to, Mother," he said in despair. "My only hope, my grandson, is missing." He could not feel more bitter. He, whose life had been blessed by his mother and her little gift, why then did it no longer work? Or did it? Suddenly the senator felt ashamed of himself. How could he feel so low? How could he doubt his own success? How could he forget his own motto, Vincit qui se Vincit? He tried to calm down. "All right, David is missing, but that doesn't mean I can't find him." He had just finished speaking with the captain of the ship. The senator had worked with the captain for decades, as well as with his security chief, Timothy. He trusted these two men. They were real Irishmen. Strong, reliable, intrepid. They would find whoever was behind this. There was no way they wouldn't. They were like fighting gods. Once they locked onto their prey, they would never let go. So there was really nothing to worry about except that someone very close to him, someone he trusted, must be involved. He felt it. He knew it. He just didn't know the name, and that meant he had been betrayed. And that was the worst kind of pain. You could overcome any obstacle, endure any hardship, but the deepest wounds were always inflicted by those you trusted. Who? The senator closed his eyes, trying to induce intuitive thinking. He tried to imagine who could hate him so much as to do this. It wasn't an easy question. People who hated him were scattered all over the world. Could it be someone from his distant past? He tried to roll back time in his memory. When he was left alone in the world, he was only 10 and still named Joseph. He needed to survive, so he formed a small gang of other homeless children, mostly orphans like himself. They lived in the basement of a large New York building and earned their living by stealing food, money from gawking tourists, distracted passers-by, and carrying out small errands for older gangsters. They didn't get rich, of course, but they survived for about 3 years, growing bolder, transforming themselves into professional criminals. He probably would have remained one had he not been caught one day by a strangely dressed woman. The senator smiled as he recalled that moment. It was late evening, almost dark. The streets of New York were dim, reeking of decomposing trash piled up across the city. The air was moist and cold, but Joseph loved it. The streets were still busy, thick with late shoppers, people returning from work, others going out to meet friends. New York was never empty. Joseph was waiting for his evening target, and there she was, the woman. She moved in a strange, exotic way, as if pretending to be more than she really was. Joseph knew this type. They were all fake and wealthy. Perhaps she had plenty of money in her purse to share with him and his little brotherhood. Or maybe he'd be lucky and grab some expensive jewelry, or who knows what else. Anything would do, Joseph decided, so he silently approached her from behind and, as stealthily as he thought possible, slipped his small hand into the pocket of her elegant coat. At that very moment, his hand was seized by another, much stronger, much faster. Without turning her head, the woman whispered in a low voice, "You should have a little more respect for a lady." Joseph responded without hesitation, without a trace of fear. "Sir, if you really want to be treated as a lady, you should be one, not just dress like one." Then the woman turned to face him, her eyes wide with absolute amazement. "How do you know?" she demanded, her voice now unmistakably male. Joseph shrugged. "I just knew, that's all." He still didn't know what it was. divine providence, or the influence of his little locket, his talisman, left to him as a blessing by his dying mother. Perhaps it was both, but that night he met the man who changed his life forever, turned it around and gave him the key to the world, literally. The man was Edgar Hoover, then at the peak of his career as director of the FBI. Hoover admired Joseph's street instincts and offered him a job. Obviously, Joseph was too young to be an official FBI agent, but he was mature enough to carry out numerous confidential tasks for Hoover. The same day they met on the street, Hoover took him to Washington. He made him a little spy, someone deeply trusted to gather sensitive information about specific individuals. Joseph was smart enough to deliver it. He was just a street boy, no one suspected him. He could infiltrate the most secure properties, intercept the most private conversations, and he did for Hoover. In exchange, he received a salary, an apartment, food and clothing, but most importantly, Hoover insisted that Joseph learn to read, write and do basic math. Hoover in many ways raised him, almost as if he were his own son. But there was a price. The first rule, practically the only rule, was absolute. No one in the world must ever know of their connection. Joseph had no choice but to accept. That was why he never said goodbye to his little street gang, the boys who had followed his orders for nearly 3 years. He simply vanished, never returning to see what became of them, whether they survived without him, whether they escaped the grim fate of professional criminals. In a way, he always felt he had betrayed them. So, could it be one of them? Had one of them suddenly found him and now sought revenge? The senator shook his head. His intuition, honed over a lifetime of uneasy experience, usually guided him to the right answer. But now his intuition was silent, and so his enemy did not come from the distant past. Then, perhaps someone closer? The senator continued his search. He knew he had to do this. He had no choice but to comb through his entire life right now, because his enemy was somewhere in his memory, waiting to be discovered. And once he found him, his revenge would be unavoidable, unless it was already too late. The senator could not allow himself such defeatist thoughts. He would prevail, no matter what, sooner or later. But how much sooner depended on him now. And that was why he must do this unpleasant task. Search for the enemy throughout his entire life, open every sealed memory, no matter how destructive or painful it might be. Vincit qui c'est Vincit.
End of chapter. To be continued. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved.